3, 2, 1.
We'd like to welcome you to another edition of Grok Talk, brought to you by New Hampshire's leading conservative blog site, granitegrok.com. We are your feared extremist, right-wing, hard-charging, gun-toting, opinionated, outspoken, rabble-rousing, letter-writing, radio microphone-stomping conservatives and rational libertarians. So get ready for more news and opinion you could only get from granitegrok.com.
Grok Talk.
All right, we are back. It is segment 4, January 10th, 2015, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'd like to thank Darlene Pollock for coming in the first segment and Dr. Jason Sorens. And we have Kevin Kervick with us, left over from the last segment, because social justice is such an awesome subject that we can't let it go, and he's going to help us clean up the segment with all the other little doodads and whatchamacallits and thingamajiggers.
Leftover?
Leftover.
I love leftovers.
He hungover. He's a hangover. He's hungover from last segment.
I had leftovers last night.
I love leftovers. I grew up on leftovers.
I love leftovers too. In fact, I always try to have leftovers. That way the next day I can bring something to lunch.
I think my mother started with leftovers. I don't even think
She
she had
started with the leftovers.
I don't know how that... We got a leftover without the first over or whatever, but I think that's how we started.
Stir-fried chicken.
That's a skill. This food is left over, but we just got it. I know. All right, so we wanted to squeeze a Whiskey Tango Foxtrot in. As always, there are tons and tons of choices, but I caught this. Drew Klein had a editorial in the Union Leader this week, and he pointed out something which should seem obvious to anybody who's paying attention. The New Hampshire Department of Safety has a mobile app that you can get on your smartphone that'll give you alerts, weather alerts, snow alerts, emergency alerts, things like that. So if you're in your car, you can get an alert. You'll know how to go around traffic accidents or if there's bad weather up ahead, kind of like what happened the other week when all those cars got in an accident because nobody knew that a squall had come through and the roads were a mess. Well, apparently they forgot to mention, although Drew did, that thanks to some legislation from the New Hampshire House last year that was Democrat-run, that the rhinos in the state Senate just kind of pushed through, and coming July 1st, you won't be able to use that app in your car because it'll be illegal.
Wonderful.
Isn't that nice?
Wonderful.
That's government at work, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, your passenger can.
Yeah, but how many of us
I wonder if they'll outlaw Google Maps, which is a navigation tool that just happens to show traffic
HB
conditions.
103?
103 goes even further, that it disables any cell phone when it's going faster than 5 miles an hour from doing texts or emails. It's like, okay, what cell phone company is going to do that just for little old New Hampshire?
And this would be
will
in-car,
be cell phone less.
in-car systems and handheld. So
you think some cash might have exchanged hands?
maybe. You know, this is one of those, they say, and it was a Republican, right?
Yeah,
Not a
Jay
great
Belanger.
Republican,
Jim
but a
Belanger.
Republican who proposed it and said it was because of a constituent who suggested it. And I've said this many, many years, because a lot of our legislators will use that excuse. They'll submit an LSR because somebody came up to them and said, hey, I think supermarket carts shouldn't have little wobbly wheels, you know? And I'm like, this is when your job as a legislator is to educate your constituent on the role of government, okay? That's your job. You're not just there to get elected.
You're not there just to tell them how government's going to do it, nor use one constituent out of 15,000 as a fig leaf.
Or 3,000 in this case for the New Hampshire House.
For your own statist tendencies. Or the whole large Hollis Brookline district, of which he's one of the members, is about 15,000 people.
My question is, in order to be able to do that, Steve, do you really think that most of these House reps, because that's who we're picking on, why not? It's an apt target. Do they really understand what the proper role of government is in the first place? I've got a whole page of what people say the proper role of government is.
The entire right-wing blogosphere exists because of that problem.
Yeah.
The role of government is to transfer cash from some people to other people. Isn't that what
That's
it is?
correct.
And legislate behavior.
Money laundering system to transfer cash.
Well, in essence, you're right, Kevin. That's what government, at least at the federal level, has become. It is nothing more than a transfer of wealth mechanism.
A vehicle.
We spend over $1 trillion, I think it's $1.3 trillion last year, to take from the haves to give it to the have-nots. Now, I don't care what the reasoning is behind it. I don't care whether it's justifiable. I don't want to hear the argument, well, I worked for years about this and it's in my lockbox. Well, then you don't know what government has done in your name because it never existed. And no, the government should never have been in the idea or the business of doing charity in the first place. That's the first problem.
And the founders spoke out about that vehemently. But
Yeah.
we haven't had a practitioner of less government, really less government, since Calvin Coolidge.
Yeah, I mean,
We need him again.
and we go back to what Ian Underwood said at one of the gun bills last session, and I think it perfectly encapsulates what you're seeing going on, because you hear from this state or that state or the federal government, we're not going to enforce those laws anymore. Well, I'm sorry, when our leadership at whatever level has decided, well, we're not going to enforce those laws. Not just that we're going to do, what's the word? Where you can excuse from enforcing a law in a specific instance. Well, I'm not going to give you a ticket this time. And I can't remember what the phrase is, but Obama has said it for his executive amnesty. When the leadership of the country says, we're not going to enforce these laws, then you wonder why people...
Nullify?
No, not nullify.
Oh.
Discretion.
Oh, discretion, yeah.
Enforcement discretion or something like that. Then the regular people like us start to say, well, if you're going to do that, why should we not be able to pick our own? After all, you guys work for us. And Ian Underwood said it perfectly, where they were going to try to pass a gun law. And he said, look, why should we obey your laws when here in the Constitution, basically in the New Hampshire Constitution, but the U.S. Constitution, it says this: if you guys aren't going to obey and stay within the bounds of our most fundamental law, why should we obey your laws? And I guess they couldn't argue that point. So when you see it coming from the bottom up and you see it from the top down, then we're getting into that nebulous idea of social justice, once again, is anything that you want. And if it's government supposed to take from these to give to those, ta-da!
Yeah, and they would abolish the Constitution. Oh, most
Oh,
of these
in a
progressives,
heart.
They think it's just an outdated. They would abolish it. And I actually was at a conference in St. Jude, and two people were saying that. We just need to abolish this and start over again. And it needs to include, positive values.
Stalin would agree.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, that's what FDR's Second Bill of Rights were. That's what Obama has railed against.
Yeah.
The founders said negative rights, what government cannot do to you, like you cannot suppress speech, cannot suppress the freedom of expression of religion.
Right.
It's not supposed to infringe on our... It was supposed to be a limiting factor for a government.
Right.
FDR's Second Bill of Rights, you should have the right to a job. Farmers should have a right to marketplaces. You should have good housing. Yada 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 yada. Yeah. All of these things were socialist ideas at the time.
These are wants, not needs, and not only that, they are
rights.
Essentially, they are not rights. They are effectively gifts from government created out of whole cloth at the expense of the productive class.
Yeah.
And the lineage runs directly from Woodrow Wilson through FDR through Obama, not forgetting LBJ in the middle and those niggers voting for him for 200 years. He's losing that, by the way.
I'm going to get more emails.
No. That is a direct quote from FDR himself, who was a very colorful and very vulgar campaigner.
As was Johnson.
Well, that's why I said LBJ, sorry.
LBJ,
yeah,
not FDR,
John,
LBJ,
yeah. Who
was a racist.
Who was a racist.
Yeah.
So was Wilson.
And basically said the Great Society was going to have the black vote locked up for 200 years.
That's what it was all
but
about.
He didn't put it that way. He put it in the colorful language I just used. That's a quote from LBJ himself.
Thank you.
And the critical thinker is allowed to quote what people actually say, right?
Yeah, and that's coming unglued, by the way, because the Democrat dream is coming unglued.
Well, it does go back to one of the pillars of progressivism is that freedom really isn't freedom until you are free from need.
Right.
And that's where it all stems from. It goes back to Marx.
Right.
Each according to their need.
Right. And the progressives exploited that. They exploited Norman Rockwell to depict these kinds of things, positive rights, right? So they've always exploited that.
But they never talk. They always say, well, we have to give freedom, make sure that freedom is there for this group of people. But they never talk about the problem in that they have to take away freedom from others. They have to violate the right to private property from others. They have to violate the rule of law for others or rewrite the law to make it look like it. I mean, again, we're coming back to the ethics, coming back to the morality. If I can't do something on the street, like say, I'm going to take your wallet, I'm now a criminal. Why is government the same? And I know progressives and Democrats and those on the left are going, oh, such a horrible example. But when you get down to brass tacks,
It's legal plunder. There's no difference.
it's legal plunder. Dan Itzy is.
I mean, we agree to give some of our labor for some shared interests, maybe a road, maybe a police officer, maybe a fire department.
That
So,
system actually was a pretty good use of government, actually, to let people know when there might be an accident ahead or something like that.
So let's look at exactly what you just said in terms of agreeing to give some of our hard-earned cash. We basically agree to give the federal government very little. They have one job to do well, which is to negotiate us out of wars and to fight those wars when they have to. That and prevent the states from fighting amongst each other and attempting to tax each other, Department of Commerce. They don't have much else to do, and they really shouldn't. And at the local level, we agree to fund police stations, fire stations, schools, and so on. And at the state level, what minimal bureaucracy we, as the people of the state, agree to have in our particular 1 out of 50 laboratory of democracy.
To keep the towns from fighting or the counties from fighting or whatever. It's just like the federal government's supposed to keep the states from fighting. I did want to add, I'm sorry to interject this, Tom sent me an email from the convention. He says the First Amendment failed. The Second Amendment was so pooped that Gould withdrew it.
Yes!
And they were debating the Third Amendment at whatever time this was, 9:34. So the first two amendments failed. Yay.
Okay, the second one was
Second
about
was
the
withdrew.
delegates.
Right. The second one was...
What was the first one again? I think I even posted it. I can't remember.
Was that... No, the third one...
Oh, that's the chair getting a cut of the money raised, I think.
Yeah, I thought that was a good idea. I think it was worded badly, though. I think that people had problems with the wording of that amendment, but I've argued that the chair should get paid.
Well, certainly travel expenses should be paid.
They should get some money for the job, and then they'd maybe actually spend some more time doing it. Anyway, so I'm sorry to interrupt that great discussion, but I wanted to get that out in case we didn't have time, because I knew that we would just keep going, and I'd never fit it in.
We always do. We could be here all day and not run out of material.
No, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
My wife, the most esteemed wife, TMEW on the blog site, would never allow me to. Well, she might, but like any decision, there'd be a consequence. And that's the other thing about progressives. They want to mitigate all bad decisions. Right. There should be no bad consequences.
Protect people from their decisions.
As we talked about earlier today, Obama with his line about, I would not want to punish my daughters with a baby. I'm sorry. Sometimes bad decisions, you don't learn from bad decisions unless there is a bad outcome.
Well, let me try to go, if you don't mind, to action. I mean, I'd like to suggest a few things.
Please.
We're good at talking, and the left is great at doing stuff. I mean, they just act, right? And I don't, frankly, see why conservatives or libertarians would be sending their kids to schools like Southern New Hampshire University that are clearly propagandizing and espousing values that are opposed to their own values. I look at these students in my class, and a number of them, when they get a hint at all that I'm going to talk about resilience or responsibility or sort of conservative principles, so then they sit up in the back of the class. The young men, especially in the back of the class with their baseball caps on, sitting there, all of a sudden they start looking, listening. And they think, oh, maybe this guy's actually going to listen to us a little bit, or maybe talk about things that we maybe agree with.
You should bring us in. Wouldn't that be a blast?
Well, you guys should do a class. You guys should do a class, So I think that conservatives around the country...
Granite Grok civic classes, what about it?
Why not?
Held at the gun range.
Yeah.
If being against the social justice thing doesn't get you canned, that might.
Well, for sure. Well, that's already gone. Anyway. They've already kind of moved me out by not offering. So
let's talk about action. I don't want to get too far afield. That's
I think that we should start a movement that conservatives should stop supporting things that are working against them. So why are we giving money to universities like this that are obviously working against us? Why are we sending our kids to universities like this that are working against us? Why are we sending money to organizations that are obviously anti-Christian, anti-male, anti-white person? Why are we supporting these non-profit corporations that are, veiled social justice sort of organizations, right?
I think that's already in process. I think it's already happening. You're seeing the homeschooling population exploding. It has always grown in the last 20
Right.
years. You're seeing government trying to roll that back by more and more enforcement. And I think that brings up the point. Conservatives tend to act either by themselves or in small groups.
Yeah.
The left uses government.
Mobs.
The mobs.
And the media.
Mobs and the media. So it is hard to break through. But as we talked about earlier, 2/3 of the state legislatures are now Republican.
Yeah.
34 of the governorships are now owned by Republicans.
Right.
Yes, we see the House and the Senate now controlled by Republicans. We see that here in New Hampshire. Now, yes, we can have the discussion, well, how Republican, how conservative? There is a big chasm between a lot of Republicans and conservatives.
And what they're missing is that conservatives, by and large, came out and voted them in because, notwithstanding how much the party has ticked them off, especially in the 2012 presidential, they still can't stand Obama's agenda and the liberal agenda, and they want it stopped.
Yeah.
They want it stopped in Washington too, and that's why Boehner was in so much trouble.
Yeah, and Glenn Reynolds, one of my favorite blog sites to go to because he's a news aggregator with a libertarian flair for one-liners and such, has been pointing out these examples of what's going on, like the UVA fraternity scandal that wasn't, and they're still going to get punished by a progressive head of that college for being blameless at this point. And you look at that, and it, yes, it's he only gets 2 million, 3 million readers a day, but the word gets out because people like us will pick up on that and spread it out. And people are starting to say and starting to see the value for this education isn't there anymore, and enrollments are decreasing.
Yes.
Well, in fact, he wrote books on the coming crisis in education.
Yep.
Good.
Because it's effectively not economically viable anymore.
Law schools closing, that kind of thing.
Our school just hired 3 lawyers, compliance lawyers. One for Title IX, one for some other thing. So what do lawyers make? $150,000 a year? I don't know what they make. So probably $400,000.
You mean they were out of compliance with the Bureau of Compliance?
In order to be in compliance
That's a Stein quote.
with the regulatory federal stuff, we got to hire all these lawyers. Adjuncts get paid $2,400 a course, and it takes us, hours to prepare the course and teach the course. These lawyers are being paid. So we have to hire all these people just to deal with the federal government stuff, and we're not paying adjuncts well. Tuitions are skyrocketing. So universities are basically big scams, right? They're big public scams that are taking money, not educating kids. We're taking too many kids into college, right? There are many kids in school that shouldn't be in college. They should be in many other
and
things.
the compliance issue, I mean, you could say the state of New Hampshire could pass a bill like, say, it states that say we aren't going to enforce federal gun laws. You could say we are not going to enforce federal compliance standards for education. The problem is they own the loan system for colleges.
Right.
We can't do anything about it. We need to take a really short break. We'll be right back.
This is the Coalition of New Hampshire Taxpayers. We're located at 8 North Main in Concord, New Hampshire. This is a repository for all things conservative and municipal. So if you have a problem in your town, your school, your budget committee, the right to know law, and now at the top of our list is voter fraud. You have a tip for us, some information for us, you want to join or help us out, cnht.org.
Hi, this is Rich Gerard, host of Gerard at Large in the Morning, the Manchester area's only locally owned, locally operated, focused, and interested, riveting radio show, heard live every Monday through Friday from 6 to 9 on 90.7 FM WLMW, New Hampshire Family Radio, and available 24/7 live or archived at gerardatlarge.com. Be sure to tune in.
Rock Talk.
I really can't stay.
Baby, it's cold
This is
outside.
the last segment. You'll have to listen to this.
Baby,
Oh,
it's cold
please.
outside.
That's a good song, though. Anyway,
You dropped in.
now that I've stalled the conversation,
Yep.
Mike wanted to interject something
Sure.
in a different direction.
In a totally different direction. My squirrel flew off the other side, yeah. So there are 2 things going on this week. Over at American Thinker, there was a piece on what happens to the Republican prospects if people like Palin, Levin, and maybe even Limbaugh say, you know what, the party isn't worth it anymore. Levin's pretty much said it. Limbaugh's trying very, very hard not to say it. And, you know, we only need Palin to stand up with a banner and say, follow me, boys, it's time for a new party, and there'll be a freaking stampede. But, you know, this time around, Jeb is the media and party darling until he falls on his face for the obvious baggage he carries.
He'll get McCained.
Yes, he will. And Romney's been out. Romney's been out there up until now, professing he wasn't going to do it and getting amazing ratings because, as I call him, Romney Unplugged has been appearing everywhere and actually doing a pretty good job of presenting himself. And I actually say this, you know, we argued against Romney's lack of conservatism early on, but Romney as an early campaigner in 2011 and 12 was extremely effective until the party tentacles got into him. And, you know, and Romney's a smart guy. He learns his lessons. What if Romney Unplugged was the candidate that ran? What if Romney Unplugged didn't take advice from the consultant class, from John H. Sununu and all the people that did him harm last time? What if he embraces the Tea Party? What if he embraces Palin and says, you can campaign your own way, I won't dumb you down like McCain did?
Boy, that's a lot of what ifs.
Yeah,
and,
but
and just as an aside, I put up a post saying exactly that. What if the O'Brien faction in the New Hampshire House decided to form its own new party? Mm-hmm. And I've been putting up a few posts the last few days of people who said, I'm done with the Republican Party. But back to your what ifs, that's a lot of what ifs, and I don't think he'd go there.
You know, I'm not so sure. Like I said, the early Romney campaign was very, very effective with his Obama Isn't Working website styled after Thatcher's campaign, with his sudden sneak attacks at places like Solyndra. He actually was very, very effective. And it wasn't until he got into the party machinery or it got into him.
Yeah, but how does he avoid that this time?
Well, I think...
Because ultimately he's going to get the party's nomination. If he's going to get the party's nomination, he has to wade into the machinery.
Yeah, but I think he can tell them, we've learned from experience, I either campaign my way or you lose.
But we've had 2 cycles of him professing what his values are. And one of the things that he is going to get hit from on the right is Romney flip-flop, because the first time he ran and lost in the primary, he got nailed for flipping on all kinds of things. That, well, he was John Kerry to death. You know, he was for it before he was against it, or vice versa. I mean, a lot of people on the right, and as we saw here in New Hampshire, if you tick off the conservatives, you will lose. And we saw that at the top of the ticket, and yes, you know, in a very informal campaign, I think Granite Rock was one of the louder speakers of that. Certainly I was. And
early on I was as well.
Yeah.
But I watched Romney and some of his campaigning, and I still thought he was an effective campaigner. The problem was that not only did the party consultants dumb him down after that first debate, but more importantly, you know, and another Sununu disaster, as you wrote, Steve. At the convention, Sununu intentionally pissed off the Libertarians, and they didn't just stay home. They followed him on the campaign trail, putting up laser writing saying he was no different from Obama.
Yeah. Well, here in New Hampshire, again, I hate to be the broken record if people understand what vinyl records are. New Hampshire State Senate Republicans. Whose agenda did they push at near the end of the session? Not a dime's worth of difference. Got proven real true right then and there with Medicaid expansion. And Jeannie Forrester, whom I have not talked about very much lately, probably will be talking about a lot more.
Yeah.
You know, tried to say at the Belknap County Republican meeting this past Wednesday, trying to distance the Senate Republican plan from Obamacare's Medicaid expansion plan. You know, just ask yourself, would they have done that if the Obamacare Medicaid plan money hadn't been available? You're darn tootin', because she made it a big point. Well, if the feds don't ante up, this plan goes on to defeat. I really never got an answer to the question of, are you guys really going to sunset it? And she would say, well, only the law says right now. No, it's not what the law says right now. What are you going to do in the future? I didn't follow up. Much to my dismay, I didn't. I was trying to be good.
You've rolled out the flypaper, and you've caught a lot of good, innocent poor people, taking them off of their company-provided plans onto an even less effective Medicaid plan, which is now going to go away because doctors won't serve people that don't pay enough.
Yeah, I brought that up.
And Medicaid is not paying enough, and it's going to get worse. And eventually the money from the feds goes away. Having suckered people onto it, are they going to have the balls to stand up and say, you know what, we screwed up. We're going to drop you off it again. Go get your own.
No, because as we learned a while ago, a politician's first job is their own re-election, period. There are very few people who say, I will stand on principles come what may. End of story.
Which is why we have those leadership classes, which I think Susan and JR are promoting. Oh, sorry.
That was not supposed to be
said. Yep.
All right.
Do we need to issue memos?
Let's just say this. Politicians should feel the pain, especially if they don't stand on principle.
Well, we talk about
Let me
that.
plug this too a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, back to that.
If you don't mind, I want to just plug. Jane Aitken, our friend, wrote a great article that's just came out this morning on Bedford Patch about this situation.
Mm-hmm.
So just Google Bedford Patch, Jane Aitken's article, and it's extremely well written, and it lays it out clearly and puts it in the right context, I think. And she's encouraging conservatives to take a stand, to speak out, and to let's make this a national story so people really realize what's happening in universities.
And it should. It should, because it shows a takeover of progressivism, whether he wants to call it that or not. Oftentimes people in the progressive movement, on a scale of 1 to 10, where we're probably a 12 on the conservative side, he may be a 3, 4, or 5, maybe on the progressive side. They don't understand. They see themselves as being directly in the middle. He's not a 5. He's a 3, maybe a 2. If he's going to the White House with Yale, Harvard, and whoever, that he's more like a 2.
Well,
but they see themselves as being the pragmatic center.
They do.
They don't understand that they're not. We freely admit we are who we are. I don't have a problem with that. You get somebody like Bernie Sanders, from senator from Vermont, who says, I'm a socialist.
I applaud him because he's honest.
He's honest. Dennis Kucinich, same thing when he was in the House. He was honest about where he stood. We're honest about where we stand. It's these other people on the left, especially in the newsrooms, let's pull that back in again, who said, we're not on the left, we're straight in the middle. No, you're not.
Yeah, we need to grab those narratives. We need to really, if I had my druthers, the Tea Party movement would be primarily about going after the media narratives. Our number one enemy, so to speak, would be the media. We'd be really trying to force better narratives into the media.
All right.
Oops, I hear the music.
That's it.
And pragmatism is another word for statism.
All right, your microphone's up. Yeah, we got to end the show. We have these things we have to do. All right, thank you, Kevin, for coming in. Thanks again to Jason Sorens and Darlene Pollock. This is Grok Talk. We'll be back next week.
Yeah, baby!
When asked whether she still supports Obamacare, Senator Jeanne Shaheen said,
yes, I do continue to support the law. We're beginning to see some positive results.
How can Senator Shaheen say we're seeing positive results when 22,000 of our neighbors have already lost their health insurance? What's worse, the Boston Globe reports the state's only health insurance provider radically reduced the number of hospitals in their network, forcing some people to drive over an hour for lab work, even when there's a hospital within a few miles of their home. When pressed about lack of access, Shaheen said,
there are some hospitals that are not covered, unfortunately, and I certainly hope that's going to change.
Jeanne Shaheen promised us we could keep our doctors and our health care coverage. Now she hopes we can get to a local hospital? Call Senator Shaheen at 603-647-7500. Tell her we need more than hope. We need leadership. Paid for by Citizens for a Strong New Hampshire.
Senator Jeanne Shaheen said, if you like your current health plan, you can keep it. That's not true, Senator. 22,000 New Hampshire citizens have been kicked off their insurance plans. Hospitals in Rochester, Concord, and Portsmouth, they aren't allowed to provide care under the exchange. Senator, you were wrong in your comments. You should apologize for your misleading remarks. I'm calling Senator Shaheen at 750-3004 and telling her I want my doctor back. You should too.
Paid for by saberpac.org, not authorized by any candidate or candidate committee.
All of the music on this program comes to us through Creative Commons licensing from Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com. The opinions expressed on this program are those of the speakers, and not necessarily those of CNHT, GraniteRock.com, or anyone else for that matter.